The hidden cost of resurrection. A man stood before a sealed tomb in Bethany. 4 days of decay separated him from the friend he'd loved. What happened next would change everything. Not just for one family, but for an entire movement that would shake the foundations of power itself. And what they never tell you is what came after. The price that was paid, the darkness that followed the miracle. Stay with me until the end, because this isn't just a story about bringing someone back from death. It's about what happens when you challenge the natural order and the forces that rise up to crush you for it. Let me take you back to a small village outside Jerusalem, 1st century Judea, a place where power was everything and miracles were dangerous. Bethany sat just 2 miles from Jerusalem's walls, close enough to see the temple gleaming on the hill, close enough to feel the eyes of the Sanhedrin watching everything. The village was small, maybe 50 families, mud brick houses clustered along dirt roads, olive groves stretching toward the Mount of Olives, a place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were impossible, where choosing sides meant something. The year was somewhere around 30 AD. Tiberius ruled Rome from his island palace. Pontius Pilate governed Judea with an iron fist wrapped in diplomatic silk. And the religious authorities in Jerusalem held power through a delicate dance with their occupiers. It was a world of checkpoints and informants, of taxes that crushed families, of Roman soldiers who could requisition your donkey or your son with equal indifference, of crosses lining the roads as warnings. The temple stood at the center of it all, not just religious center, economic powerhouse, political machine. The high priest Caiaphas ran it like a CEO. Every sacrifice generated revenue. Every festival brought pilgrims with money. Every transaction reinforced the system. And into this world walked a carpenter's son from Nazareth who spoke like he had authority higher than Caesar's. Bethany belonged to a family, 3 siblings who'd built something rare in that brutal world, a safe house, a place where the traveling teacher and his followers could rest without fear, where questions could be asked, where the kingdom Jesus kept talking about could be imagined out loud. Martha, the eldest, ran the household with precision that bordered on obsession. She was 35, sharp-featured, strong hands from years of work, the kind of woman who could manage a household, negotiate with merchants, and keep the peace between her siblings all before breakfast. She'd never married, not from lack of options, but because she'd chosen something else: independence, control, a home that was hers. In that culture, that choice came with whispers, with judgment, with assumptions about her character. She absorbed it all, kept working, kept building, kept the door open to people who needed sanctuary. Mary, the middle sibling, was different. Contemplative where Martha was practical, quiet where Martha was direct. She was 32. Dark hair she wore long, eyes that seemed to see through surfaces to whatever lay beneath. She'd sit at Jesus' feet for hours, listening, absorbing. While Martha worked in the kitchen, Mary would be in the courtyard, asking questions that made the disciples uncomfortable. Questions about power and kingdoms and what it meant to lose your life to find it. Some called her lazy, others called her strange. She didn't seem to care. She'd found something worth her attention. Everything else could wait. And then there was Lazarus, the brother, the anchor, the one who held them together. Lazarus was 32, twin souls with Mary, different paths. He was a merchant who traded in oils and spices from the East, frankincense from Arabia, myrrh from Somalia, cinnamon from distant India, goods that passed through multiple hands before reaching Jerusalem's markets. He had kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled, Thick beard he kept trimmed, hands marked with small scars from loading crates and handling reins. The kind of man who remembered your name after meeting you once, who shared his table with strangers and never asked questions. His reputation was solid, fair in business, generous with loans, quick to forgive debts when times were hard. In a world of sharks, he somehow stayed human. But he had a secret, one that was becoming increasingly dangerous. His home had become a sanctuary for a traveling teacher named Jesus and his followers, men who'd walked away from fishing boats and tax tables, who spoke in riddles about kingdoms and resurrections, who were being watched by forces they didn't fully understand. It started small, a meal, a conversation, an invitation to return. But over 3 years, it became something else, a base of operations, a safe house, a place where the movement could breathe. The disciples knew the house well. Peter, impulsive and loud. John, young and intense. Judas, who handled the money and asked too many questions about resources. Thomas, skeptical of everything. Matthew, still uncomfortable around the others because of his tax collector past. They'd gather in the courtyard after dark, oil lamps flickering, wine flowing, Jesus teaching until his voice went hoarse. Parables about seeds and soil, stories about fathers and sons, warnings about wolves in sheep's clothing. And always, always the underlying message: something was coming. Something that would flip the world upside down. A kingdom not built on violence, but on sacrifice. Not sustained by fear, but by love. It sounded beautiful. It sounded impossible. And the authorities were tracking every word. The temple authorities had been watching Jesus for months. Every healing, every sermon, every crowd that gathered. Reports came in daily. Names went into ledgers. Houses were marked. Bethany was marked because hospitality was collaboration, and collaboration was treason against the delicate balance Rome and the Sanhedrin had built. Jesus spoke about authority coming from somewhere else, somewhere higher. That kind of talk got people killed. The high priest had spies everywhere, merchants who reported on conversations, servants who listened at windows, even some disciples who asked the wrong questions and talked to the wrong people. Caiaphas sat in rooms lit by oil lamps, receiving reports from informants. He was a politician first, a priest second. He understood power, how to get it, how to keep it, how to eliminate threats before they metastasized. And Jesus was a threat. Not because of violence. Jesus never raised a fist, but because of something more dangerous. He raised hope. In a system built on despair, hope was revolutionary. Every time he healed someone, he proved the system wasn't absolute. Every time he ate with sinners, he challenged the hierarchy. Every time he spoke about a different kingdom, he undermined the current one. And Lazarus was making it all possible. His house, his money, his network of merchant contacts, his reputation that provided cover. Lazarus knew the risk. Every time he opened his door, he was choosing sides in a war most people couldn't even see. But he did it anyway, because some friendships demand everything. He'd watched Jesus heal a man born blind, had seen him calm a storm on the Sea of Galilee, had listened to teachings that made his heart burn with something he couldn't name. This wasn't just an interesting teacher. This was something else, something that made the air taste different, made possibilities seem real. So he kept the door open, kept the food coming, kept providing the space for this impossible kingdom to take shape. And death was coming for him, not as punishment, not as accident, but as setup, for something that would make his choice to open that door look like the most important decision anyone ever made. If you're feeling that cold twist in your stomach, wondering where this is going, subscribe to this channel, because this story is just beginning, and what comes after is darker than you can imagine. The fever started on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Just a headache at first. Lazarus woke before dawn, like always, went to the well to draw water, felt the pressure building behind his eyes. Nothing unusual in the heat. He'd had headaches before, probably dehydration. He drank deeply, splashed water on his face, went about his day. He had shipments coming in from Jericho, spices from a caravan that had originated in Damascus, good quality frankincense. He needed to inspect it, negotiate prices, arrange transport to Jerusalem. But by mid-morning, the headache had become something else, a pounding that made his vision blur. He excused himself from the negotiation, told his partner to finish without him, walked home slowly, hand pressed to his temple. Martha saw him come through the gate, knew immediately something was wrong. Her brother never left business unfinished. Lazarus? Just tired. I need to lie down. She felt his forehead. Hot. Too hot. You're burning up. It's nothing. The heat. I'll rest and be fine by evening. But he wasn't fine by evening. By sunset, he was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. Martha brought cold cloths soaked in water from the well, pressed them to his forehead, to his neck, to his wrists. Mary sat beside him, holding his hand, praying quietly. The prayers of someone who'd spent too much time thinking about the distance between heaven and earth. By Wednesday morning, Lazarus couldn't stand. The fever burned through him like wildfire through dry grass. His skin turned gray. His lips cracked. His breath came in shallow gasps that scared Martha more than she'd admit. She'd seen fever before, seen people recover, but she'd also seen people die. And something about this felt different, felt urgent, felt wrong. She made a decision, sent a runner, a young man from the village who was fast and loyal, gave him money for the journey and a message. Lord, he whom you love is ill. The runner left immediately, pushing through the Judean heat toward the Jordan Valley, where Jesus was teaching in Perea, 2 days' journey away. The message was clear, urgent, come now. Jesus was in Perea with his disciples, beyond the Jordan, relatively safe from the authorities, teaching crowds that gathered daily, healing, preparing his followers for something they couldn't yet understand. When the runner found him, breathless and covered in dust, Jesus listened to the message. The disciples gathered close. They'd all stayed in Bethany. They loved Lazarus. Teacher, if he's sick, we should go. But Jesus said something strange, something that made them exchange glances. This sickness will not end in death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Then he stayed where he was for 2 more days. The disciples didn't understand. John asked why they were waiting. Peter wanted to leave immediately. Even Judas, usually calculating, seemed confused by the delay. But Jesus knew something they didn't. Timing mattered. What was about to happen required precise coordination, required Lazarus to be not just dead, but undeniably, irreversibly, 4 days in the ground dead. Because what was coming wasn't just a healing. It was a statement, a declaration, a preview of something that would break death permanently. Back in Bethany, Martha waited, checked the road constantly, kept the cold cloths coming, whispered to her brother to hold on. He's coming, just hold on. But Wednesday passed into Thursday, and Lazarus got worse. The fever peaked, his body convulsed. He thrashed in his bed, tangling the sheets. Martha had to call neighbors to help hold him down. to keep him from hurting himself. Mary never left his side, just held his hand, whispered things no one else could hear. Prayers, memories, promises that she'd see him again. Thursday morning, Lazarus stopped recognizing his sisters. His eyes went glassy, stared at nothing, or at something they couldn't see. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Martha knelt beside him, gripping his burning hand, begging him to hold on. "He's coming. Jesus is coming. Just hold on." But her voice cracked, because part of her knew Jesus wasn't going to make it in time, knew her brother was slipping away, knew she was about to lose the one person who'd always been there. The village began to gather. Word spread fast in small places. Neighbors came with food, with water, with presents, the way people do when death is close. They sat in the courtyard, spoke in low voices. Some prayed, others just waited. The women prepared materials for burial, just in case. Strips of linen, myrrh, aloes, the expensive spices reserved for important deaths. By Thursday afternoon, Lazarus's breathing changed, became irregular, gasping, then shallow, then long pauses between breaths. Martha pressed her ear to his chest, listened to his heart stutter, felt it slow, felt it stop. She pulled back, looked at Mary. No words, just the knowledge passing between them. Their brother was dead. The sound Martha made when his chest went still was something animal, something that came from a place deeper than words, a wail that neighbors heard 3 houses away. Mary collapsed across his body, silent tears, the kind of grief too deep for sound. The women moved in, began the rituals, because death demanded action, required movement, made waiting impossible. They washed the body, Lazarus's skin already cooling under their hands. They handled him gently, with love, singing the songs meant for the dead. They wrapped him in strips of linen, wound them around his arms, his legs, his torso, soaked them in myrrh and aloes. 75 pounds of spices, an extravagant amount, but he'd been an extravagant friend. The scent was overwhelming, sweet and choking. It filled the house, clung to clothes, to hair, to memory. They wrapped his face last, one final look at features they'd known since childhood. Martha touched his cheek, Mary kissed his forehead. Then the cloth covered him completely. The men came, lifted the wrapped body, carried it on a bier through the village. A procession of grief, mourners wailing, dust rising from shuffling feet. The family tomb was outside the village, carved into limestone. A small cave, sealed with a stone. Martha and Mary had buried their parents there years ago. Now their brother joined them. They laid Lazarus on the stone shelf inside, arranged his body carefully, spoke blessings over him, then rolled the stone across the entrance, sealed it. Martha stood there as the sun set. Her brother was in the ground, and Jesus still hadn't come. The anger hit her like a fist. Where was he? He'd healed strangers, had time for crowds, but couldn't come for the man who'd opened his home, who'd risked everything? Mary felt something different, not anger, confusion, like a piece of a puzzle that didn't fit. Jesus loved Lazarus, everyone knew it, so why stay away? But there was no answer, just the sealed tomb, just the gathering darkness, just grief that had nowhere to go. The village mourned properly. 7 days was traditional. Neighbors brought food, sat with the sisters, spoke memories of Lazarus, his kindness, his laugh, the time he forgave a debt that would have destroyed a family. Saturday passed, the Sabbath, heavy with grief and confusion. The house felt empty without him. His chair at the table, his sandals by the door, his coat hanging on its peg. Everything a reminder, everything a wound. Sunday came. The formal mourning continued. But the crowd thinned. People had fields to tend, work to do. Life moved on, even when yours had stopped. By Monday, only the closest friends remained, sitting in the courtyard, speaking in low voices, asking questions no one could answer. Why had Jesus waited? The question ate at them like acid. If he'd come immediately, Lazarus would still be breathing, still laughing, still alive. Some of the disciples' families were there, women who'd traveled with Jesus, men who'd heard his teachings. They had no answers either, just faith that felt thinner than usual. That's when Martha saw him, coming up the road from Jerusalem, his disciples around him, moving with purpose. Her heart did something complicated. Relief and rage tangled together. He was here, finally. Too late, but here. She ran to meet him before he reached the house. Didn't want this conversation to happen in front of everyone. Didn't want witnesses to what she needed to say. Her words came out sharp, edged with hurt. 4 days of hurt compressed into one sentence. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It was accusation and faith mixed together, because even in her anger, she called him Lord. Even in her pain, she believed he could have changed everything. Jesus looked at her, really looked, not with pity, not with defensiveness, with something else, like he could see straight through to her shattered heart and knew exactly how much it hurt. Your brother will rise again. Martha's response was automatic, theological, safe, the kind of thing you say when someone's trying to comfort you and you don't want to be comforted. I know he will rise in the resurrection at the last day. Future tense, distant, abstract, the kind of belief that doesn't help when your brother is rotting in a tomb right now. But Jesus said something that changed the air itself, something that made Martha's breath catch. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Present tense, immediate, personal. Not about someday, about right now. Martha stood there. The gap between what she believed and what she felt was a chasm. Her theology said yes. Her grief said it was too late. But something in his eyes, something in his voice made her take the leap. Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. She said it, even when everything inside her screamed that death was final, that 4 days in a tomb meant the end, that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. She said yes. And something shifted, like a key turning in a lock. Martha went back to the house, found Mary sitting with the mourners, leaned close, whispered, "The teacher is here. He's asking for you." Mary stood immediately, left without explanation. The mourners followed, thinking she was going to the tomb to weep. It was common. Grief came in waves. She found Jesus on the road, fell at his feet. The words came out choked. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. The same words Martha had used, but different. Martha's had been sharp. Mary's were broken. Less accusation, more devastation. Jesus saw her tears, saw the crowd gathering behind her, Jews who'd come from Jerusalem to mourn, neighbors, friends, everyone crying. And he wept. Not politely, not quietly. The Greek word is strong, embrimamoi. He was deeply moved, groaning in his spirit, shaken to the core. Some in the crowd murmured, "See how he loved him." Others remembered doubts. Couldn't this man who opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying? But something else was happening, something they couldn't see. Jesus wasn't just grieving. He was groaning under the weight of what he was about to do, the cost it would carry, the chain of events it would trigger. Because this wasn't just about Lazarus. This was about demonstrating power that would force the authorities' hand, that would accelerate a timeline, that would lead directly to another tomb, another death, another resurrection that would change everything. Jesus was weeping for his friend, but also for what was coming, for all of them. He walked toward the tomb. The crowd followed. This strange procession of grief and curiosity and something else. Expectation, maybe? Or fear? The tomb was a 15-minute walk from the house, a limestone cave carved into a hillside. A circular stone rolled across the entrance, sealed tight. Jesus stood before it, stone silent. The crowd waited. "Take away the stone." The words fell like hammers. Take away the stone. Open the grave. Expose the dead. Martha's voice cut through, practical even in horror, even in hope. "Lord, by this time there's an odor. He's been dead 4 days." 4 days. She needed him to understand. 4 days in the heat. 4 days of decay. 4 days past the point where the soul was said to linger near the body. In Jewish tradition, that was the point of no return. Day 1, the soul hovers, hoping to return. Day 2, the face changes. Day 3, decomposition begins. Day 4, the soul departs completely, accepts death, moves on. There was no coming back from 4 days. Even if you believed in miracles, even if you'd seen the blind healed, 4 days was too far. But Jesus looked at her, patient, steady. "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" The men moved forward, villagers who knew the family, who'd helped bury Lazarus. They put their shoulders to the stone, pushed. It scraped against rock, groaning, resistant. Then it moved, rolled aside. The tomb opened. The smell hit them immediately. Sweet, rotten, the unmistakable scent of death. People covered their faces, stepped back. Some gagged. This was real. This was 4 days. This was decay. Jesus stood at the mouth of the tomb, looked in, into darkness, into death, into the place where hope went to die. Then he lifted his eyes to heaven, spoke to his Father, out loud, so everyone could hear. "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." This wasn't for him. This was for them, for witnesses, for testimony, for evidence that would spread across Judea and beyond. Then he shouted, voice like thunder rolling across stone, voice that carried authority over atoms and cells and whatever separates life from death. "Lazarus, come forth." Silence. The crowd held its breath. Seconds stretched into eternity. The tomb stared back, dark, empty, dead. And then, movement. Something was walking in the darkness of the tomb, shuffling, the sound of fabric dragging against stone. The crowd pressed closer, straining to see, not sure if they were seeing anything at all. Maybe shadows, maybe wishful thinking, maybe fear. But the sound continued. Footsteps, uncertain, like someone learning to walk again. Then he appeared, at the mouth of the cave, wrapped head to toe in burial cloths, strips of linen binding his hands and feet together, face covered, moving like a man fighting through water. Someone screamed, others gasped, a few fell to their knees. Because this wasn't possible. This wasn't natural. This was something else, something that broke the rules, something that changed everything. Lazarus stood in the sunlight, wrapped like a corpse, moving like a living man. Jesus' voice cut through the shock, calm, commanding, "Unbind him, let him go." The disciples rushed forward, hands shaking, started unwrapping the grave cloths. The linen strips came away, releasing the smell of myrrh and aloes and something else, something harder to name. They unwrapped his legs first, so he could stand properly, then his arms, then his torso. Each layer revealing skin that should have been gray and rotted, but wasn't, was pink, warm, alive. They unwrapped his face last. The crowd leaned in, holding their breath. And there he was, Lazarus, blinking in the sunlight, breathing, confused, alive. His eyes found his sisters. Martha was frozen, mouth open, unable to process. Mary was crying, laughing, making sounds that were neither. Lazarus took a step forward, unsteady, like legs remembering how to hold weight. Martha caught him, held him, sobbed into his shoulder. Mary wrapped around them both. The three siblings, together again, against every law of nature. The crowd erupted. Some fell to their knees. Others ran to tell everyone in the village. The impossible had happened. Death had been reversed. The teacher from Nazareth had just done something no prophet had ever done. Not Moses, not Elijah, no one. Lazarus was alive. But not everyone celebrated. At the edge of the crowd, some men watched with different eyes. Not wonder, calculation. They'd come from Jerusalem, members of prominent families, connected to the Sanhedrin. They'd heard reports about Jesus, came to investigate, to assess the threat level, to determine what needed to be done. And now they'd witnessed this, seen a man 4 dead walk out of a tomb, seen proof that couldn't be denied, seen power that challenged everything. They slipped away quietly, walked the 2 miles to Jerusalem, found the chief priests, told them everything. And in those temple rooms, in the shadows, men began to plan. Because this wasn't just a miracle. This was an act of war against their authority, against the order they'd built, against death itself. Caiaphas listened to the reports. His face remained calm, but his mind was racing. This was worse than he'd feared. Not just teachings, not just crowds, but power, real power, power over life and death. The council convened. Chief priests, Pharisees, Sadducees who normally couldn't agree on the time of day. But they agreed on this. Jesus was an existential threat. What are we to do? Someone asked. This man performs many signs. Another responded, if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. The Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. It was political calculation dressed as religious concern. They weren't worried about theology. They were worried about power, about losing their positions, about Rome deciding they couldn't maintain order. Caiaphas stood, addressed the room. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd made hard decisions before. You know nothing at all. Nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish." It was a prophecy he didn't understand, meant one way, true in another. One man would die, but not to preserve the nation, to save it from sin, from death, from everything. But in that moment, it was a death sentence. The council voted. Jesus had to die. The only question was when and how. Then someone raised another issue, one that hadn't occurred to most of them. What about the man he raised? Silence fell. They looked at each other, realizing the problem. Lazarus was evidence. Walking, breathing, talking evidence. As long as he lived, people would remember, would point, would say, "That's the man who was dead," would believe. You couldn't deny a miracle when the miracle was standing in front of you. Another vote, another decision, one that doesn't appear in most gospel accounts, one that got edited out, or suppressed, or deemed too dark for the main narrative. But it's there in the margins, in the texts the church fathers debated over for centuries, in the fragments found in caves and monasteries. They decided to kill Lazarus too. Think about that. They were so threatened by a man coming back from death that they plotted to send him back, to erase the miracle by erasing the evidence. If this story is gripping you, hit that like button now. It helps this channel grow and motivates me to bring more stories like this one. The days after the resurrection were strange for Lazarus. He moved through the world like someone not quite connected to it, like he was remembering how to be alive. People stared, pointed. Some asked questions he couldn't answer. What was it like? What did you see? Did you go to Abraham's bosom? Did you see God? He'd smile, shake his head. "I don't remember." And maybe that was true. Or maybe there are some things you don't speak about, some places you don't describe, some knowledge that doesn't translate. But his eyes had changed. Everyone noticed. They carried something new, a weight, a distance, like he was looking at everything through a filter, like he knew something the rest of them didn't. His sisters tried to treat him normally. Martha cooked his favorite meals. Mary sat with him in the courtyard, not talking, just being. But there was a gap now, a space between them and him, between the living and the one who died. Jesus visited often, more often than before, like checking on something precious. They'd walk together in the olive groves, talk in low voices. Lazarus asking questions no one else heard. "Does it hurt?" someone claimed to have overheard. "When it comes?" And Jesus, patient, honest. Yes, but only for a moment. They weren't talking about headaches. The disciples were different around Lazarus too. John would watch him constantly. Peter asked questions that showed he was thinking about his own death. Thomas wanted details, specifics, proof he could touch. But Lazarus gave them nothing, just smiled, just breathed, just existing as living proof of something they were only beginning to understand. Word spread fast, beyond Bethany, beyond Judea. Pilgrims coming for Passover heard about the man raised from the dead. They made detours, wanted to see him, touch him, verify he was real. Lazarus's house became a destination, a site of pilgrimage. People camped outside, waited hours for a glimpse. Some brought sick relatives, hoping proximity would bring healing. Others just wanted to say they'd been there. It was overwhelming, invasive, dangerous. Because every crowd drew attention, every gathering meant reports filed. Every visitor was a potential informant. Martha worried constantly, watched the roads, counted the men who stood too long near their house, the neighbors who asked too many questions. the merchants who seemed more interested in conversations than sales. Mary felt something else, a sense of urgency, like time was speeding up, like something was coming that couldn't be stopped. She'd always been sensitive to the unseen. Now it was stronger. Dreams that weren't dreams, impressions that felt like warnings, a darkness gathering like storm clouds. Lazarus felt it too. He'd caught whispers, heard concerns, knew the authorities weren't pleased with his continued existence. He wasn't naive. He'd chosen this path when he opened his door to Jesus years ago, had understood the risks then, understood them even better now. But he also knew something else, something he'd learned in the tomb, or after it, or between death and life in whatever space exists there. He knew death wasn't the end, not anymore, not really, which meant fear had lost its ultimate weapon. The plot unfolded during Passover week. Jerusalem swelled with pilgrims, hundreds of thousands, maybe more, coming from across the empire, to celebrate, to sacrifice, to remember liberation from Egypt. The perfect time for something to disappear, for an accident to happen, for a man who'd already died once to simply vanish. The council moved carefully, couldn't be obvious, couldn't martyr him. That would make things worse, make him a symbol, make the movement stronger. It had to look natural, or random, or like simple tragedy. They hired men, not Roman soldiers, not temple guards, just men who did this kind of work, who knew how to make problems go away, who didn't ask questions as long as the money was good. But Lazarus knew. He'd seen the watchers, the men who weren't merchants, the faces that appeared too often, the questions neighbors were asked, the pressure building. He made his own decision, one that would save his sisters and honor the life he'd been given back. He would leave. 6 days before Passover, Jesus returned to Bethany. They threw a dinner, not a party, something quieter, more intimate, a gathering of friends who knew time was short. Lazarus was there, reclining at the table, between Jesus and Simon the leper, surrounded by people who'd seen him dead, who'd helped bury him, who still couldn't quite believe he was breathing. Martha served, as always, moving through the room with efficiency, bringing food, filling cups, making sure everyone had what they needed. But her hands shook slightly. Her eyes were red. She knew what was coming, knew her brother was planning to leave, knew she might never see him again. Mary waited until the meal was mostly finished. Then she brought out a pound of pure nard, expensive perfume, spikenard from the Himalayas, worth a year's wages, maybe more. She knelt at Jesus' feet, broke the seal. The fragrance exploded through the room, overwhelming, beautiful, excessive. She poured it over his feet, used her hair to wipe them, anointing him like a king, like a corpse, like someone precious beyond measure. The disciples shifted uncomfortably. This was too much, too intimate, too wasteful. Judas spoke first, always Judas. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He didn't care about the poor. He managed the money bag, helped himself to it, saw this as waste of a different kind. But Jesus defended her, voice gentle, firm. Leave her alone. She's anointing me for my burial. You'll always have the poor among you, but you won't always have me. Everyone heard it, the finality, the countdown, the acknowledgement that something was ending. Lazarus heard it too, heard the parallel, heard Jesus claiming his own death, preparing for his own tomb, following the same path Lazarus had walked. But different, so different, because when Jesus died, he wouldn't come back to eventually die again. He'd come back having changed death itself, having broken it, having taken its keys and thrown open every locked gate. After dinner, Lazarus found Jesus alone in the olive grove, looking toward Jerusalem, the city lights flickering in the darkness. "I'm leaving," Lazarus said. "They're coming for me. I won't let Martha and Mary get caught in it." Jesus, nodding, didn't try to stop him. "Where will you go?" "Cyprus. I have contacts there. Merchants will take me in. I can start over." "You'll never really start over." Jesus turned, looked at him. "You've been to the other side. You're carrying that now, forever." Lazarus nodded. "I know, but I'm alive because of you. I won't waste that. I'll tell people what you did, who you are, what's possible." "Even when they don't believe?" "Especially then." Jesus smiled, sad, proud. "They'll hunt you, not just here, everywhere, because you're proof, and proof is dangerous." "I know." Lazarus paused. "Will I see you again, after?" Jesus didn't answer immediately, just looked at him, through him, to whatever came next. In the kingdom, when everything's made new, when all the dead are called forth and every tomb is empty. They embraced, brothers in something deeper than blood, bound by death and resurrection, and the knowledge that some things cost everything. The next morning, Lazarus left before dawn, took only what he could carry, said goodbye to his sisters with tears and promises, told them to sell the house, to leave Bethany, to follow wherever Jesus led. Martha held him tight. "Come back to us. In this life or the next, I promise." Mary kissed his cheek. "You're different now. You know that, right?" "I know." "What's it like, being someone who died?" He considered, like remembering a dream. "Or like living in one. I'm not sure which." He walked out of Bethany as the sun rose, took the road toward Jericho, then the Jordan Valley, then the coast, disappearing into the network of merchants and travelers and people who could make a man vanish. Behind him, the plot continued. The authorities tracked him for a few weeks, then lost him, decided he was less important than the one who'd raised him. They turned their full attention to Jesus. The next few days moved like a dream, or a nightmare, depending on where you stood. Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. The crowds went wild, branches, cloaks, shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." It was theater, revolutionary theater, the kind that got kings nervous and rulers angry. The temple authorities watched from windows, took notes, made plans. The tipping point had arrived. In the upper room on Thursday night, Jesus gathered his disciples, washed their feet, broke bread, shared wine, spoke in symbols they wouldn't understand until later. "One of you will betray me." The shock, the denials, the questions. Who? How? Why? Judas left, went to the chief priests, told them where Jesus would be, away from crowds, vulnerable, arrestable. 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave, the cost of betrayal. That night in Gethsemane, Jesus prayed, sweat like blood, begging for another way, knowing there wasn't one, accepting what was coming. They arrested him. Peter drew a sword, cut off an ear. Jesus healed it, rebuked violence, went peacefully. The trials were a farce, religious charges before the Sanhedrin, political charges before Pilate, shuffling between authorities who didn't want responsibility. The beating was brutal, thorns pressed into his scalp, fists into his face, a crown of mockery, a robe of purple, soldiers laughing at the King of the Jews. Friday morning, the Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering, cross on his back, stumbling through Jerusalem, blood mixing with dust, crowds watching, some weeping, some shouting curses. Golgotha, the place of the skull. They nailed him to wood, lifted him up, let gravity do its work. He hung there for hours. Darkness fell at noon, like creation itself recoiling. He cried out, words from Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Then, it is finished. He died, really died, not sleeping, not mostly dead, dead. They took him down, wrapped him in linen, laid him in a borrowed tomb, rolled a stone across the entrance, sealed it, guarded it. Saturday, the Sabbath, the longest Saturday in history. The disciples hiding, the women weeping, the authorities satisfied. Death triumphant, evil victorious, darkness winning. But Sunday was coming. The women came at dawn, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Salome, carrying spices, expecting to anoint a corpse. The stone was rolled away. The tomb was empty. The grave clothes folded. An angel, or maybe two, depending on which account you read. Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen. They ran, told the disciples. Peter and John raced to see. Found it exactly as the women described. Empty. But what did it mean? Mary Magdalene stayed behind, weeping in the garden. Someone approached. She thought he was the gardener. "Woman, why are you weeping?" She turned, saw him, really saw him. Rabboni! Jesus, alive, changed, glorified, but still him, still recognizable, still real. Over the next 40 days, he appeared to hundreds, to the disciples, to crowds, to Thomas, who needed to touch the wounds, to Peter, who needed forgiveness, to 500 at once. He ate fish, walked through walls, appeared and disappeared, existed in a body that operated by different rules, that had passed through death and come out the other side, wearing resurrection like a new skin. And everywhere he went, people remembered Lazarus, remembered the preview, the warm-up act, the proof that death wasn't permanent. But this was different. Lazarus came back to life. Jesus came back as life. Lazarus would die again. Jesus would never die again. Lazarus was resuscitated. Jesus was resurrected. The implications rippled outward, like a stone dropped in still water, circles expanding forever. If death wasn't final for him, it wasn't final for anyone who believed. If the grave couldn't hold him, it couldn't hold them. If resurrection was real, everything else was possible. The disciples transformed, from frightened men hiding in rooms to bold proclaimers filling streets, from deniers to martyrs, from cowards to heroes. They went everywhere, told everyone, "He is risen. We have seen him. Death is defeated. Come and die." That last part confused people. Come and die? But that was the point. You could afford to die now, because it wasn't the end, wasn't the final word, was just a doorway to something else. The movement exploded, not through military might, through testimony, through proof, through people who'd seen a dead man walk, who'd touched resurrection flesh, who couldn't shut up about it. And in Cyprus, Lazarus heard the news, heard about Jesus, about the empty tomb, about the appearances, about the ascension. He wept, not from grief, from relief, from vindication, from understanding finally clicking into place. His resurrection had been temporary, local, limited, but it pointed to this, to the real thing, to the ultimate victory. He began to teach, to gather followers, to plant churches across Cyprus, to tell his story. The man who died and came back, who'd seen both sides, who knew death wasn't the monster everyone feared. But he also taught something else, something from experience, something the others couldn't know yet. He taught that resurrection had a cost, that coming back meant carrying both lives,
that walking in two worlds left marks on your soul.
He taught that some doors, once opened, never fully close, that the space between life and death was thinner than people realized, that forces moved there, things that noticed when someone crossed the boundary. The apocryphal texts are vague, deliberately cryptic. They talk about darkness that followed him, about doors that wouldn't stay closed, about dreams that weren't dreams. Like he'd created a crack in the barrier between worlds and something had slipped through. There's a Coptic manuscript, fragments found in Nag Hammadi. It describes Lazarus performing exorcisms, casting out demons, having authority over them. But the language is strange. It says he had authority over them because he'd walked in their house and returned, because he'd been where they dwelt, had seen their realm, had come back carrying knowledge they feared. Some scholars think it's metaphor, spiritual language about death and sin. Others think it's literal, that Lazarus genuinely encountered something during those 4 days, something that gave him insight and weapons and authority. The text describes incidents, people brought to him, possessed, tormented, suffering from afflictions that had no natural cause. Lazarus would look at them, not with fear, with recognition, like he knew what he was seeing, like he'd met these entities before. He'd speak, not prayers, commands. I know you. I've been where you dwell, and I'm telling you in the name of the one who called me forth, leave. And they'd leave, screaming, raging, but leaving, because there was something about him, something that carried weight in their realm. He became known for it, the man who died, who returned, who had power over things that terrified everyone else. But it cost him. Every exorcism, every confrontation, every time he wielded that authority, it took something from him, reminded him of where he'd been, opened old wounds. Some nights he'd wake up gasping, not sure which side of death he was on, reaching for light, for breath, for proof he was still alive. His followers would find him in the morning, exhausted, drained, but resolved, because someone had to do this work. Someone had to stand in the gap. Someone had to be willing to pay the price. He planted churches, ordained leaders, trained disciples, spread the gospel across Cyprus and beyond, became a bishop, a teacher, a father in the faith. But he never lost that weight in his eyes, that distance, that sense of someone who'd seen too much. People would ask him, "What's it like, being dead?" He'd pause, consider, like drowning and flying at the same time. "What did you see?" "Things I can't describe, things that don't translate, things that would break you if I told you." "Do you wish you'd stayed?" Long silence, then, every day and never, both. The years passed. Lazarus aged, gray in his beard, lines around his eyes. But something about him stayed young, or stayed timeless, like he existed partially outside the flow of time. He trained a successor, a young man named Epaphras, taught him everything: how to lead, how to teach, how to recognize the darkness, how to fight it. "You'll face things," Lazarus told him, "things that make no sense, that shouldn't exist, that you'll want to deny are real. How do I fight them? You remember. Remember who you serve. Remember that death is already defeated. Remember that resurrection is real, and you speak with that authority." Does it get easier? Lazarus smiled, sad, honest. No, but you get stronger, and the kingdom is worth it. The end came when Lazarus was 62, 30 years after his resurrection. A good life, a full life, a life lived twice. He'd been feeling it for weeks, a pull, like something calling him home. Not his earthly home, the other one, the one he'd glimpsed during those 4 days. He gathered his followers, the church he'd built, the people he trained, the lives he changed, told them it was time. Don't be sad. I'm going somewhere I've been before, somewhere I know the way, and I'm going to wait there until you join me, until we all join each other, until the final resurrection when everyone comes forth. They wept anyway, because grief is love with nowhere to go, and they loved him. He died on a Thursday, same day of the week he died the first time. Some saw symbolism in that. Others saw nothing but loss. But his last words, everyone remembered his last words. He smiled, looked at something no one else could see, and whispered, "Finally." Like he'd been waiting, like his second life had been a borrowed thing, a gift extended beyond its natural term, and it was time to return it. They buried him facing east, toward Jerusalem, toward the empty tomb that mattered more than his ever had, toward the promise of resurrection that wouldn't be temporary this time, that would be final and complete and forever. They carved above his grave, words chosen carefully, words that captured everything. Lazarus, called forth by love, awaits the final call. Not the first call, that one already happened, but the final one, the one Jesus promised, the one that would wake every sleeper, empty every tomb, raise every dead person, and remake creation. The church he planted survived, grew, spread. The stories multiplied, the testimonies compounded. The movement he helped build conquered Rome without a sword. And somewhere in the historical record, in letters and manuscripts and fragments preserved by accident, his influence echoes. Paul mentions him, obliquely, when talking about resurrection, about first fruits, about Christ the firstborn from the dead, but also about others who'd been raised, who tasted death and life, who carried that knowledge. John's gospel devotes a whole chapter to him, to the miracle, to the implications, to the plot it triggered. But even John doesn't tell the whole story, doesn't follow Lazarus beyond Bethany.
Doesn't describe the cost. The apocryphal texts do. They talk about the man who walked in two worlds, who carried death's mark and life's blessing, who knew things others didn't, who paid prices others couldn't imagine. They talk about his authority, his power, his burden, the way light and darkness both recognized him, the way he moved through the world like someone not entirely of it. Some texts go further, claim he had visions, revelations, knowledge of what comes after, of the structure of eternity, of the mechanics of resurrection. One fragment, found in Oxyrhynchus, papyrus partially destroyed, claims Lazarus wrote his own gospel, a different account from the perspective of someone who died, who'd crossed the boundary, who'd returned with intel. But if that gospel existed, it's lost now, destroyed, suppressed, deemed too dangerous for circulation, too revealing of mysteries that weren't meant to be revealed. All we have are hints, fragments, whispers in the margins, breadcrumbs leading to knowledge the church decided was too much. But the core story remains, the man who died, who was called forth, who lived twice, who paid for it, who never regretted it, who became proof that death wasn't the final word. The implications shake the foundations of everything. If Jesus could call one man back, he proved death wasn't permanent, wasn't final, wasn't the ultimate power. And if death isn't the ultimate power, then what the Sanhedrin feared was right. Everything else could be challenged. Every authority, every system, every throne. That's why they wanted Lazarus dead again, not out of cruelty, out of fear. Because as long as he lived, he was proof that a new kingdom was possible, one where death didn't have the last word. But they failed. Even if they'd killed him, the story would have survived. The testimony would have spread. You can't silence a resurrection by causing another death. The message was out. Life was stronger than death. Love was stronger than hate. Hope was real, tangible, proven in a man who'd rotted for 4 days and walked out whole. And that message terrified the powers of this world. Still does. Because if resurrection is real, nothing else is ultimate. Not government, not money, not violence, not fear. Nothing can claim final authority when death itself has been defeated. Every empire built on fear faces the same threat, the same subversive claim, the same revolutionary message. You can kill us, but you can't keep us dead. We'll rise, we'll return, we'll inherit the earth. That's what made Christianity dangerous, not the ethics. The Romans had philosophers, not the miracles. They had magicians, but the resurrection, that was different. That changed the calculus. If Christians weren't afraid to die, you couldn't control them with violence. If they believed in future resurrection, you couldn't crush them with persecution.
If they had hope beyond the grave, they had freedom in life. Lazarus was the first Christian in that sense, the first to die and return, the first to live with resurrection knowledge, the first to operate with death-defeating authority. Every martyr after him followed his path, faced death, walked through it, trusted resurrection, proved the empire's ultimate weapon was useless. And the empire fell, not to armies, to testimony, to people who couldn't be silenced by death, to a movement built on an empty tomb and a man who walked out of one in Bethany 30 years earlier. The historical trajectory is clear. Resurrection power changes everything, reconfigures society, redistributes authority, reveals that the powers that be are temporary, mortal, defeatable. That's the hidden cost of Lazarus's resurrection, not just his personal burden, but the cosmic implications, the chain reaction, the kingdom inaugurated, the powers challenged, the war declared. Every resurrection is an act of rebellion against death, against fear, against the systems that profit from both. Every empty tomb is a protest. Every living testimony is subversion. Lazarus knew this, lived it, paid for it. 30 years carrying the weight of being proof, of being evidence, of being the sign that pointed to something bigger. And he did it willingly, because some things are worth dying for, and coming back for, and dying again for. Because if resurrection is real, nothing else matters as much. Not comfort, not safety, not even life itself. Because life isn't the highest good anymore. Kingdom is, truth is, love is. And those things are worth any cost. If you made it this far, you're part of a rare group who's willing to look at the darker corners of sacred history, who can handle complexity instead of Sunday school simplicity. The story of Lazarus isn't just a feel-good miracle. It's a declaration of war against death, against fear, against every force that tells us this life is all there is, so bow down, shut up, and accept your chains. Lazarus broke those chains, paid a price for it, lived with the weight of it, and in doing so, became a living testament that there's more to reality than what we can touch and measure. His resurrection was temporary, but it pointed to something permanent, to Jesus coming out of his tomb 3 days later, to the promise that everyone who believes will follow, to the future when all graves open, all bodies rise, all death dies. That's the gospel. Not just forgiveness of sins, but resurrection power. Not just heaven when you die, but life breaking into death, light invading darkness, love conquering hate. And it costs everything. Like it cost Lazarus, like it cost Jesus, like it costs anyone who takes it seriously. But it's worth it.
Because the alternative is living under death's shadow, fearing the inevitable, building kingdoms on sand.
Pretending this life is enough. Lazarus proved it wasn't. Proved there was more. Proved resurrection was real. And lived the rest of his days carrying that knowledge, that burden, that glorious, terrible, beautiful truth. Subscribe to the Apocryphal Archive and hit that notification bell. Every week, I dig into the hidden corners of sacred history, the stories they don't teach, the implications they don't explore, the truth that makes people uncomfortable. Drop a comment and tell me, if you could ask Lazarus one question about what he experienced in those 4 days, what would it be? What do you think he saw? What do you think he learned? What secrets do you think he carried? I read every single comment, and I'm genuinely curious, because this story raises more questions than it answers. And maybe that's the point. Next video, I'm going deep into the Book of Enoch's description of what Lazarus might have actually encountered. The 7 heavens, the Watchers, the place between life and death that most people never return from. The cosmology that makes his resurrection even stranger, even more significant, even more dangerous. We're talking about realms the church doesn't discuss, powers they don't acknowledge, realities that got edited out of the canon because they were too much, too wild, too threatening to controlled narratives. Until then, remember, some resurrections cost more than we know, but they prove something worth the price, that death isn't the end of the story. It's just the middle. And what comes after, what rises from the tomb, what walks out of the grave, that's where the real story begins. Lazarus knew that, lived it, died proving it, and waits even now, in whatever realm the righteous dead inhabit, for the final call, the one that will wake everyone, the one that will empty every cemetery, the one that will prove, finally and forever, that love is stronger than death. And when that day comes, when the trumpet sounds, when the graves split open, Lazarus will be there, walking out again, for the 3rd and final time, into a resurrection that will never end, into a body that will never decay, into a life that will never be threatened again. That's the promise. That's the hope. That's what his temporary resurrection pointed toward, what his 30 extra years testified to, what his strange, burdened, powerful life proved was possible. Death isn't final. Darkness isn't ultimate. Fear isn't the foundation of reality. Love is, life is, resurrection is, and that changes everything.